Welcome to Aging Gayfully. We're about adventure, leisure, travel, being a citizen of the world, traveling to destinations, and being a part of the global community as we age and prosper in body, mind, and spirit.
Welcome to Aging Gayfully. I'm Josh.
And I'm Chris, and I'm continuing to age gayfully, Josh. What about you?
I am still learning.
It's never too late to learn a new trick.
We look back over our summer, and my little family traveled to the UK, without me, I might say. And it did get me to thinking about summer vacation and summer trips. And I know that we are all about travel here. When you think back to traveling as a kid, a lot of warm memories there. Is that where your travel bug came from?
Oh, goodness. My travel bug did come early as a kid. And I'm going to talk about the second experience first, because I think that's pretty cool. My first plane ride. I remember it like it was yesterday. I might have been, 11 or 12. My mom put me on a plane with her, and we went to New Orleans. Yeah, that's where she was born and raised. And so much of our rich history is from New Orleans. But I remember that like it was yesterday, because I was all dressed up in a coat and tie. And, this is in the 60s. And, you walked out on the tarmac. And the stewardesses were all, it's just, that vivid memory of your first airplane flight. It resonates in me. And it was apropos that it was to New Orleans, because New Orleans has been like a second home for me and all of my siblings, as my mother was born and raised there, aunts and uncles, and the rich history of New Orleans. And as a kid, and this is, I don't have the exact memory of this. This is from my much older siblings, I must say. But I want to say hello to all of them who are listening. But as a kid, I was, there's 8 years difference between my next sister. I've got 3 sisters in their 80s, nieces and nephews as old as I am. But those trips to New Orleans as a kid, my mom would put us on the train in St. Louis for a summer trip to New Orleans. Now, what's different about that, this is in the early 60s, so I would have been 7, 8, 9 years of age. So my siblings were kind of in charge, but there was no parent that went on this trip. The conductor was entrusted in keeping us in line, and that we didn't get off the train at any point and arrive safely in New Orleans. Now, Josh, you have kids. Can you see in this day and age putting your 8-year-old kid on a train and standing on the side waving as the train's going down the track? Could you see that happening today?
Well, you'll be very surprised to learn that very often I turn to Amanda and I say, I'd like for us to have a date night. Can we see if the local train conductor's available to babysit? That's almost every other week I find myself saying that. Yeah. I do have to tell you, though, that I have a similar experience. My dad used to work for the airlines. He used to work for Eastern Airlines out of Miami, and he would often put me on a plane to go to visit relatives or to go do this and do that. And the stewardesses and the pilots were in charge of me. I mean, same thing, same type of deal. And by the way, And I do feel like I've reached a certain age when I start to say things like this. But wasn't it nice when people used to get dressed up to go on airplanes? Wasn't that just delightful when people would put an effort in instead of, rolling out in their PJs, going through security, and then going onto the plane? Wasn't that nice?
Yeah, because it was stylish. It was trendy. It was something.
It was an occasion.
It was an occasion. It was an occasion.
And I aspire to be someone who makes an effort and dresses for occasion, but I'm fighting a losing battle against our society now. But that is a different show.
That's it.
We are going to talk about New Orleans today. New Orleans is a place that's close to my heart. I visited, maybe 5 or 6 times, and I love it there. So I'm very excited to talk about New Orleans. New Orleans, situated along the Mississippi River in Louisiana, near the Gulf of Mexico, and often referred to as the Big Easy, boasts a lively atmosphere with its constant nightlife, vibrant music scene, and distinctive cuisine influenced by French, African, and American cultures. This city, embodying a festive spirit, attracts millions of tourists annually, reaching almost 20 million. The renowned Mardi Gras, celebrated with raucous parades and street parties, adds to the city's allure. It features extravagant costumes and flamboyant balls hosted by various crews, including, of course, LGBTQ+ specific events. But there's so much more to New Orleans. Let's talk about it. So, New Orleans. Chris, I'm very excited to talk to you about New Orleans because, of course, as much as I love it, you have a different perspective. You have said that it's like your second home. So, New Orleans, what are some things that pop into your mind, fun things, memorable things about New Orleans? Like, I know that you love the beignets.
I loved beignets before I knew they were carbs.
That's a T-shirt right there, baby.
and past the extra powdered sugar.
I guarantee.
Going to New Orleans as a kid, it was always Café du Monde or Morning Call. Those were the two beignet restaurants in New Orleans, right in the French Quarter. And they eventually, especially Morning Call, moved out to Metairie, which has grown leaps and bounds since our days. And as a kid, I remember my grandma saying, talking about Metairie. Now this is in the '60s. She said, "You were going to go all the way out to Metairie?" Well, it was probably like a mile or a mile and a half from where she lived in New Orleans City. But it, again, it's kind of the growth of any region. And, for me, New Orleans, going to New Orleans as a kid and getting the opportunity to know my aunt and, again, they were me coming along as a late caboose because we're going to talk about the trains. Most of those folks, most of the relatives that I had in New Orleans, they all made their life transitions in the '60s. And early '70s, so my memory of them was that more of a kid than as an adult. That unlike my older siblings who have vivid memories of a lot of the relatives there. I certainly have vivid memories of my grandmother. I say that, and she and I don't think I was her favorite grandchild. But speaking of my grandmother. I know we've mentioned earlier about my mom being a kind of a woman before her times with 2 degrees and being sent off to St. Louis to finishing school to marry a rich tycoon in New Orleans because my grandmother and her sister and my aunt, they had this grandiose plan for my mom to come back to St. Louis, come back to New Orleans and. But she ended up staying in St. Louis and marrying a Canadian. Who would have known? But my grandmother, she had a hat shop on Canal Street. She was a businesswoman, and she had to be because I never knew my grandfather. He died way before I was born. But there was some controversy with him and his business dealings and. My sisters being the how would I say this in that day and age? My sisters, who were the inspectors, who would go to the library and look at all the film from the newspapers, back newspapers in the early 1900s, and before there was this thing called Google, where you could
Right.
look at everything. They
Right.
would go and research all the backstories and history, and which really told a lot of the stories of our family and the folks that were involved in grandmother's side and my grandfather's side of the family. Grandmother was German, and my grandfather was French. So you have this cornucopia of cultural backgrounds that ends up in one of the rich cultural cities of New Orleans.
So I do have a question, because you mentioned Café Du Monde. I'm wondering, I mean, now you go to the French Quarter and it is overrun with tourists.
Right.
Is that how it's always been in your memory, that's just been, this is the place where tourists go?
I think New Orleans has always been a tourist destination, and and I guess with the caveat of knowing that New Orleans is also a river town.
Yeah.
And a number of because it's the portal into the Mississippi and into the Gulf of Mexico. So there's always been that flavor of tourists or people in the shipping industry or the oil industry that's so prevalent in Louisiana. And of course, one of the biggest draws to New Orleans has always been the French Quarter and Mardi Gras.
Yeah, sure.
So that that's a part of the rich history of New Orleans that is a draw to the city, and the landmarks like Café Du Monde, Morning Call, the restaurants in the French Quarter, Antoine's, Jackson Square,
Sure.
the St. Louis Cathedral, and just walking in and around the French Quarter and on Canal Street. I mean, that's where the place to be in New Orleans, and now it's where all the tourists are as well.
My favorite thing about New Orleans had to be walking down, walking all through the French Quarter, walking down Frenchman Street, and just being surrounded everywhere by music pouring out of the bars,
Music everywhere,
music
Yeah.
on the sides of the street. You'll hear something, and all of a sudden there's a band, a marching band or something just parading down the street just because.
It's probably a funeral.
Second line, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Remind me.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I've seen one of those. That's not what this particular thing was, but yeah, even that is just something that is amazing. The coolest thing for me, last time Amanda and I went, we were walking down the street, and I look over, and this gentleman was sitting by the side of the road on I think he had brought his own rocking chair or something. It was just in the middle of I mean, there's nothing around. And I take a look, and I recognize him as Grandpa Elliot, who is I don't know how well known he is, but he's a musician who's certainly well known in New Orleans, and he's done some recordings with some other artists, and that's how I became aware of him. And he was just sitting right there, so I went and
sitting right there.
He can't see; he's blind. So I went but I introduced myself and took a picture with him. And to me, that was like, this is like magic. I often think that New Orleans is like rated R Disney World. Because there's music all around. There's so many things. There's people in costume. When we were walking through the French Quarter, there was some sort of amateur act happening on a light pole between Chewbacca and Princess Leia.
Yeah.
And Darth Vader was there, and they were reenacting some sort of intimate encounter. So, like I said, R-rated Disney World.
Yeah, I think I've never heard it put that way, but yeah, and when we going back into the 60s and 70s when I was a kid, we would drive down to the French Quarter, go up and down Canal Street, and you could actually drive your car up and down Bourbon and Royal Street in the evenings and see all these magnificent establishments with a variety of activities that you wouldn't find in an area that you grew up in yourself.
Unless you grew up in Amsterdam.
Touche. That is a very good analogy. Unless you grew up in Amsterdam, and that is, that's kind of like the dichotomy of New Orleans is that the impression is that New Orleans is it's certainly a beautiful city, rich history, friendly people, food is off the charts, but there's this misconception that New Orleans is like a very liberal area, and it's really not. It's New Orleans in and of itself is conservative.
That takes me by surprise until I think about it. And I mean, I live in the South, and that describes a lot of southern cities, whether it's a tourist spot or whether it's a college town. I live in a college town, very packed in around the college with the students and the professors, very, very liberal, but then surrounded by, hey, folks, this is still the South.
Very much so. And the ambiance of the French Quarter and Mardi Gras and the wonderful traditions that New Orleans has around the French Quarter and Mardi Gras, pales in comparison to, New Orleans is a conservative town with progressive people. In a sense, that's how people are supposed to get along.
Say more about that.
Well, there's so much political jargon going on today, especially around our LGBT community. But there's room for people from different walks of life and backgrounds to get along and coexist. And I think New Orleans is a perfect example of that. People from different backgrounds and experiences and orientations can get along okay because they have that common goal of being present to one another.
So here's my question then, because you obviously have more history or experience with New Orleans. Do those two things coexist peacefully there?
I think at one time it did. I do know, unfortunately not, New Orleans is, the crime rate in New Orleans is pretty high. But crime rate in a lot of major cities in the United States is pretty high. My experience has been, even to this day, and I got nieces and nephews in New Orleans. I'll always have relatives in New Orleans. Until this day, that spirit of the NOLA people is there and vibrant. They're kind, they're considerate, they're firm in their beliefs, but they're welcoming. And that's the part of New Orleans with all its dichotomy and flair, and that's what makes New Orleans New Orleans.
You went there several times as a child. In our last episode, you talked a bit about how you didn't initially feel comfortable in St. Louis when it came to coming out, when it came to expressing yourself. Did going to New Orleans help you along that path in any way?
It did. And I often wonder, it'd be interesting as we continue with having guests on our Aging Gayfully podcast, that coming out experience. Oftentimes, folks feel more comfortable coming out in an environment that from once they did not grow up from. And that could be either somebody that's in a large town or a small town. It happens a lot when you're in a small town. But there is that sense, whether right or wrong, that when you're in a different community per se, that I'll just go ahead and say it, you're not looking over your shoulder.
Sure,
who's going who's going to find out about my secret? Well, if I go somewhere else, then I'm new and I can develop my own friends and I don't have to worry about somebody finding out at home about my secret. Because, as we mentioned in the last episode, we don't have secrets. Secrets have us. And all too often, people who are going through the coming out process, they're looking for those outlets, that safety net. Who can we have this conversation with? Some some people just fly out of the closet, and it's okay. That's their style, and that more to them. But for some people, it's not that easy. And even for a lot of today's gay seniors, we grew up in a different environment than what we are currently in. And now, obviously, last couple of years has been a little bit more challenging for the gay community with a lot of the rhetoric that's been going on. But, folks like myself and those who are older, we're always kind of, I don't know if reserved is the right word, but cautious.
Guarded.
And your guard gets let down when you're a safety zone. And sometimes those safety zones mean going to a different location for some people.
Well, you've got these parents who are very conservative parents who are scared that the liberal college is going to distort their innocent teen. Their teen goes to college. They come out because this is who they've always been, and the parents blame the college. No, jackass. It's that your child finally feels in a safe place, and aren't you ashamed that it ain't with you?
Well, right. And again, I never had this conversation with my parents. It would not have gone over well.
So you're in New Orleans, but what I want you to do is you're a kid, and I really want you to paint me the picture, put me there. The first thing you saw that your eyes went round and you're like, oh, that just happened.
As a kid driving down Bourbon Street, well, with the lady swinging out the window with her legs. You don't see that too often in the suburbs of St. Louis. That was certainly an eye opener. But amazingly, New Orleans, as a kid, the first time I was introduced to an amusement park.
Oh, what?
Yeah, there was no amusement parks in St. Louis. We had fairs, the school picnic, and they had, those rides that came in on trucks. But
yeah, and the carnies.
Yeah, my vivid memory as a kid and like eyes wide open is going to Pontchartrain Beach at on the lakefront in Lake Pontchartrain. Now, unfortunately, that closed in 1983. But as a kid, that was the first place I wanted to go and get on the Zephyr roller coaster, which was one of these old wooden roller coasters that with this big curve down the hill on the first hill. It's like, that rich history of walking all around Pontchartrain Beach and seeing, what was new the next year. That was just, and not being exposed to an amusement park. It was like, oh, this is like heaven. And then I go, because I'm just going to bounce back to St. Louis for a second. Then like in 1972, I think it was, when Six Flags first opened in St. Louis. It's, it was booming now out in St. Louis County, but it's like, oh, take me to Pontchartrain Beach. This is nothing compared to Pontchartrain Beach. It was a sad day when they closed that down, and so I think it was September of 1983, because no matter when we went, we always went to Pontchartrain Beach. So
So to people who are looking at New Orleans and they get beyond French Quarter, because everyone wants to visit Café Du Monde, Jackson Square, walk down Bourbon Street to say that you've survived it. If you know a little bit more, you'll seek out other little corners like Frenchman Street. And then besides that, people really don't know what else New Orleans has to offer. There's Church Street that people know about. And then maybe okay, we got to pay a visit to Dookie Chase's for the fried chicken. But what else does New Orleans have to offer besides the French Quarter?
Oh, goodness. The rich history in the Garden District, taking the streetcar ride down St. Charles Avenue and seeing all the mansions in the Garden District. And then you pass by Tulane University and Loyola, these beautiful campuses, and then Audubon Park. And then not only Audubon Park, but then you have City Park that as a kid, we used to go around City Park in the little train. But with all the magnificent trees, with the moss hanging down, and being in this subtropical per se, but you get to all the four seasons in New Orleans. But you can pretty much travel in and around the city on the streetcar. It's a walkable city. I'm not sure how safe it is to walk these days, but the history in and of itself, just in the Garden District, and then watching how Metairie has grown. The other area where my mother and grandmother was close to the fairgrounds, to the racetrack. So we always used to walk down and could see the horses in the back of the street. And it was like a life that I could never experience in the suburbs of St. Louis. A horse? Oh my gosh. What a sight for a kid to see something like that. And I know St. Louis had streetcars, but those had pretty much dissipated by the time I was growing up. But, to go to New Orleans and be able to take the streetcar down St. Charles Avenue and just be looking left and right and seeing all these beautiful homes, all the different restaurants that are in and around that area as well. So
one of the things that we did when we were there is we took a fascinating walking tour that was based on the scandals of New Orleans. Now, I'm not much for these tours, like these walking tours. Amanda loves these walking tours. She loves the ghost tours. She loves So I went along with this one tour hesitantly. But first of all, every place we stopped, they gave us a cocktail, so that was nice. But the
that's New Orleans.
I love that. But it was so interesting because apparently there's a connection with the JFK assassination in New Orleans and like the absinthe. Right. We talked about absinthe there and the brothels that we went to. It was just so fascinating. You're not going to find that in Gainesville or probably St. Louis.
No.
I loved that. So I would highly recommend digging your fingers into that kind of history, because what a sordid little place that's been.
Oh my goodness. The other fascinating part of New Orleans is doing the cemetery tours.
Oh, interesting.
Everybody's buried above ground in New Orleans because it's so far below sea level. And, some of those, and we've tracked down, where our grandfather was buried. And then we looked at different areas where my aunt's buried in a mausoleum at St. Roch's Cemetery. And what's a riot about that? She's in the mausoleum, and you know what? She had some music that was published, and that's the staff is on her stone, but she didn't put her date of birth on her plaque. She just has her date of death.
Okay, sure. She's allowed.
The cemeteries in New Orleans are ancient of age, 200 or so years old, and you can still walk in and around and see these magnificent mausoleums all above ground. And it's something that you just don't see anywhere else.
It is interesting because it's just even the architecture, it's just very, very cool.
And the way they celebrate death in New Orleans. They celebrate it as a beginning of a new life. When the band comes down, we talked a little bit about this earlier, and when you're a tourist or you're not used to seeing something like that, you stop in your tracks, and you appreciate the send off that person is given. While we want to age gayfully for a long time, I'm feeling that's the type of send off I'd like to have.
Oh, absolutely. Have you thought about that? Have you thought about how you want your send off to go?
I have, because I think it's important to have those plans in place. It makes a very difficult day just a tad bit easier for those who are left behind. But, I have my plans in place, and my ashes are going to be spread into the Atlantic Ocean.
Oh, very nice. Very nice.
When I had the honor of placing Richard's ashes in the Atlantic Ocean, I said, he's just now a port ahead of me, and I'll get there soon.
Oh, my gosh. I love that so much.
My directives state that I'm to be placed in the Atlantic Ocean, and then I'll be catching up with Richard at that next port.
I saw a thing on social media that I'm going to do. This Irish gentleman had made a recording, and he had it placed in his coffin. And so everyone was gathered around the coffin. They lower him in, and then all of a sudden you hear this knocking. Let me out, it's hot in here. And then of course everyone busts out laughing. I'm gonna do that, and maybe I'll sing a little song, or I'm gonna do something like that. I just want to leave them laughing. That's what I want.
And that's really what I think life is supposed to be about. We certainly talk about a lot of heavy issues, but we also talk lightheartedly here on Aging Gayfully. But that, life is supposed to be enjoyed and lived vibrantly. I know you're a movie buff, so I think you may have watched this movie. If not, you will. Death at a Funeral.
Oh, I've not seen that.
You have to see Death at a Funeral, especially the British version. The British version is much better.
Okay.
That'll be
my homework. Thank you. Thank you for giving me homework.
You and Amanda I will be hearing the laughter from Gainesville to Lake Worth. So,
well, speaking of vibrant, you've obviously been there during Mardi Gras. Tell me what that's like for you.
Wall to wall people.
Oh, see, that doesn't sound pleasant.
Yeah. Now, the thing now with Mardi Gras, I think it's been 5 or 6 years since I've been to Mardi Gras, but my nephew, his house is right on one of the main drags where one of the big parades come. So we just park ourselves in front of his house, and that's fine. Well, if you can find a parking spot, but, and we'll have to post this picture of my sister and I standing under his tree, where all the beads are hanging that are thrown from the floats. Throw me your bead, mister. My memory of going to New Orleans as a kid and just having your eyes wide open about these floats coming down the street. It's like, and these, gobs and gobs of people that are just kind of pushed together, and everybody is, having a good time. And it's that spirit of community.
I have never been there for Mardi Gras, but we did visit, and this is a recommendation that I would make to anyone. We did visit Mardi Gras World. Are you familiar with Mardi Gras World?
I have to say I'm not.
It's this huge facility where they build and house all of the floats for Mardi Gras.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I get it.
And it is, oh my gosh, what a fascinating place. You're going through the workshop, you're seeing these, their work areas are on the tour, so you see them working on floats. You see these half-completed floats, and then you see these floats that are either done and getting ready for next Mardi Gras or being stored from last Mardi Gras. And so you can imagine as many floats as are used in all of the different parades, how large this place must be. And if you are at all fascinated by world building or by design or just you love art, That is a can't miss experience. Mardi Gras World.
They start planning for the next year's Mardi Gras the day after.
Oh yeah,
Mardi Gras.
they would have to.
I mean, and then the other, the other relatively new area that you want to visit in New Orleans is the World War II Museum. You don't want to miss the World War II Museum. It is breathtaking. They've taken a very difficult topic and put it in a way that you could feel like you're present at that time. It's well worth when you're in New Orleans. It's one of those places that you definitely don't want to miss.
Yeah, I don't think that we caught that. Where is it located?
It is in the Warehouse District, if I remember correctly, and it would be south of Canal Street.
Okay.
But you would just have to Google the World War II Museum in New Orleans. It's really off the charts.
Well, we need to plan our trip to New Orleans.
And we've got maybe it's one of our Aging Gayfully tours.
That's right. Yes. In my mind, we've got a tour of Europe happening, Spain. I want to eventually get to England, and we can hang around a little bit in the United States. Although I'm excited to be outward bound and explore other things.
Yeah, because it is important for our listeners to know as we develop the podcast that there will be Aging Gayfully trips, group tours that will be planned in 2024 and beyond, and it's a way to help us and help you build a community where you feel safe and secure as you travel, as you age gayfully.
Love it. Love it. Everyone needs a place where they feel like they belong, and so we would like to be that place.
Very good.
All right, Chris, that'll do us for this week. How can people get in touch with us?
Well, unlike last week when I gave the email address without the .com, this week I am going to give the complete email address, and you can email us at yesiam@aginggayfully.com. Yeah, that's .com. yesiam@aginggayfully.com. And we want to hear about your travel stories. We want to hear about your coming out stories. We want to also hear from allies who are supporting folks who are coming out, like Amanda and Josh. It's so good to be connected with you guys.
We are here along for this ride, and we are very excited. And we are going to get Amanda, the other half of the Wilsons, on here. She has a very special connection with this idea of aging gayfully. So I'm looking forward to hearing from her on that. All right, folks, until next week, I have been Josh, and that has been Chris.
And I've been Chris, and I will continue to be Chris until I change my name, but I think I might change it to Scott. I mean, Scott MacLellan.
Why Scott? That's very rare.
I don't know, because I'm Scottish.
Oh, I see. All right, I got you. All right, folks.
Okay. Thanks for joining us today.
All right, bye now.